When we rented that old house in Connecticut, we thought it was just an ordinary home for a middle-class family. It had that classic New England charm, weathered white siding, a wraparound porch, and a massive oak tree shading the front yard. The rent was surprisingly cheap, which should have been our first warning sign, but as two brothers trying to make it on our own, we just saw it as a massive stroke of luck. We packed up our lives and moved in over a single weekend, eager for a fresh start. The first few days were completely normal. We spent our time unpacking boxes, arguing over who got the bigger bedroom, and setting up our furniture. But by the end of the week, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. It started with a persistent, heavy coldness that central heating couldn't seem to fix. Then came the smell. It wasn't constant, just faint whiffs of something sweet yet sickeningly rotten that would drift through the hallways before vanishing entirely. On a damp Thursday afternoon, my brother Leo and I finally went down to the basement to organize the rest of our belongings. The basement was massive, poorly lit by a few flickering bulbs, and smelled strongly of damp earth. While moving a stack of heavy old moving boxes away from the back wall, I noticed the wood paneling felt loose. Curious, I gave it a firm push. A section of the wall groaned and swung open like a hidden door, revealing a pitch-black corridor. Leo held up his phone flashlight, and we stepped inside. The air instantly turned freezing cold, and the smell of rot hit us like a physical wall. As the light swept across the room, our jaws dropped. There, built directly into the concrete foundation, were long, rusted metal drawers, the kind used to store corpses. In the center of the room stood 3 heavy stainless steel tables, complete with deep drainage channels and dark, dried stains built into their surfaces. We were standing in a hidden, fully equipped morgue. Terrified and deeply unsettled, we went back upstairs. The next morning, I saw our elderly neighbor, an old man named Arthur, tending to his garden. Trying to sound casual, I walked over and asked him about the history of our house. Arthur stopped working, looked at me with a profound, heavy sympathy, and sighed. He told me that back in the 1970s, our house used to be the largest funeral home and morgue in the entire county. The owner had been a deeply disturbed man who eventually took his own life right inside the building after practicing horrific, unsanctioned rituals on the deceased. After hearing that, everything changed. The house no longer felt like a home, it felt like a trap. The basement became a place neither of us wanted to enter, and we kept the door firmly locked. But the house was already inside Leo. Within days, my younger brother started acting completely differently. He stopped talking to me, stopped eating, and would spend hours sitting perfectly still beneath the basement staircase in complete darkness. Whenever I would nervously check on him, I would find him staring into the pitch-black void, talking to the empty air, and laughing hysterically. But the laughter didn't sound like his own. It was layered, deep, and dripping with malice. When I would pull him away, he would blink, look at me with vacant eyes, and claimed he didn't remember anything. One night, a terrible storm hit, and I woke up around 3 a.m. to the distinct, repetitive sound of water dripping somewhere nearby. Half asleep and annoyed, assuming a pipe had burst, I got out of bed to investigate. As I stepped into the hallway, the horrific smell hit me first. It was the scent of pure decay, magnified 100 times. I looked up, and my heart stopped. A thick, dark red liquid was dripping from the ceiling, pooling onto the hardwood floor. Panicking, my mind racing, I ran down the hall to Leo's room to wake him up and get out of the house. His bedroom door was slightly open, casting a sliver of light into the dark hallway. I pushed it open and froze in absolute horror. Leo was standing motionless in the corner of the room, his face pressed flat against the bare brick wall, his back turned completely toward me. Before I could even speak, he began to rhythmically and violently slam his forehead against the bricks. Thud, thud, thud. He was doing it so hard that thick, dark blood began to smear across the wall. Terrified, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "What are you doing?" Slowly, deliberately, his neck cracked as he turned his head around to face me. My breath caught in my throat. His eyes were completely black. The irises and whites were entirely gone, replaced by a void of pure darkness. His jaw unhinged slightly,
and when he spoke, it was a terrifying, dual-toned voice that sounded like two distinct people speaking in perfect unison. He whispered, "They need a new body, and the morgue is still ready." I didn't think. I grabbed Leo by his shirt, dragging him violently out of that room and out into the pouring rain, ignoring his scratching and animalistic snarling. The next morning, we contacted religious authorities and the police. We abandoned all of our belongings, left that cursed house immediately, and never returned. Leo spent months in a specialized hospital undergoing intense psychological and spiritual evaluation before finally returning to normal. But even today, he refuses to look into any dark room, and I still lie awake at night, wondering what ancient, horrific entity was truly waiting for us in that basement.
Our old countryside house was built entirely from aged, dark wood that seemed to groan under the weight of its own history. Every single movement inside it caused loud, agonizing creaking noises, making it impossible to step anywhere in silence. It was just my mother and me living there, trying to find peace in the isolation of the countryside after my father passed away. But peace was the one thing this house refused to give us. Every night at exactly 3 a.m., I would wake up to the same chilling sound, heavy, deliberate footsteps. They didn't start at a door or a window. They would simply materialize across the downstairs hallway, slow and rhythmic. Then they would begin climbing the wooden staircase, one agonizing step at a time. I would pull the heavy blanket over my head, trembling in the pitch-black darkness as the creaking sounds came closer and closer to my bedroom door. The footsteps would always stop right outside my room. Then there would be absolute silence for 10 full minutes. I could hear my own rapid heartbeat echoing in my ears during those 10 minutes, terrified that whatever was on the other side would turn the doorknob. After that eternal pause, the footsteps would slowly descend the stairs and disappear into nothingness. For months, I kept this terror to myself, convincing myself it was just a recurring nightmare or the house settling. But one morning, exhausted and desperate, I finally confronted my mother at the kitchen table. I asked her if she went downstairs at 3 a.m. for water or checking the locks. To my absolute surprise, she didn't get angry or laugh. Instead, she burst into tears, her hands shaking as she held her teacup. She looked at me with pale, wide eyes and said she thought it was me. She confessed that the heavy footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door too, staying there in the dark for 10 minutes before leaving. A cold dread washed over me. We were both lying awake in our separate rooms, listening to something pacing between us. That Saturday night, we decided we couldn't live in fear anymore. We agreed to stay awake together in the downstairs living room to find out exactly what was happening. As the clock ticked closer to the dead of night, the air in the room grew heavy and suffocating. At exactly 2:59 a.m., the temperature inside the house suddenly plummeted. It didn't just feel chilly, the air became freezing cold, and our breath turned into white mist right before our eyes. Then the grandfather clock struck 3. Without warning, the heavy front door shook violently, rattling on its hinges, as if someone or something was pounding on it with incredible, monstrous force. The wood splintered slightly under the impact, and we clung to each other on the sofa, paralyzed by fear. And then we heard it. The lock didn't turn, the hinges didn't move, but the heavy footsteps entered straight through the locked front door. The footsteps moved deliberately across the living room rug, pressing down toward us, but there was absolutely nobody there. The space in front of us was completely empty, yet we could see and hear the wooden floorboards groaning and bending beneath the immense weight of something invisible. My mother let out a blood-curdling scream that shattered the silence. The sheer panic broke our paralysis. We bolted toward the kitchen, threw open the back door, and fled into the dark, overgrown garden without looking back. We spent the remaining hours of that horrific night sitting inside our locked car, staring at the dark windows of the house, too terrified to ever step foot inside after dark again. A few months later, unable to bear the trauma, we sold the property for a fraction of its worth to a local land developer.
When a construction contractor arrived with his crew to demolish the decaying building, he made a discovery that still haunts my dreams. Buried deep underneath the rotting floorboards directly below the wooden staircase, the workers uncovered human bones and skeletal remains dating back to the 1920s. The forensic report later revealed something even more disturbing. The victim had been walled up alive beneath those stairs, left to suffocate in the dark while listening to the footsteps of the inhabitants above. To this day, I still remember the rhythmic thud of those footsteps climbing the stairs. And sometimes, when the modern apartment I live in now creaks in the middle of the night, I freeze, staring at the floor, wondering if something from the past is still making its way toward my bedroom door.